What's going on, YouTube? I wanted to talk about a little article I was reading about why the new poverty line should be set around $140,000 here in the United States, and a general argument that was kind of made, and I somewhat agree with it. You're kind of in the current state of affairs here. You're kind of better off. You'd be better off making $30,000 than you are making $70,000. This article, author's name was Mike Green. I'll link it obviously below if you guys want to go check it out. It's a good read, not that long, little short one I caught on my lunch break. Full interesting information about, like I said, he's making the argument that the poverty line should be adjusted, and that it's basically lagged behind. It's no longer a good measure for what we do. And if you don't know what the poverty line is, everything's basically scaled off that. If you're getting federal benefits, a lot of it has to do with where you lie around the poverty line, and it scales off as you go above the poverty line. If you're at 100% poverty, 200% poverty, 300% poverty, if you know anything about that. Your SNAP benefits, Medicare, all that kind of stuff, child care, help, all the government benefits all scale accordingly off poverty line stats. The first thing he started the article off with, and what caught my attention, and if you know this, let me know, because I've never heard of this before. The poverty line, how it was established originally. I believe it was 1963. An economist took the cost of food times 3, minimal cost of food times 3, and it sets a floor. So it's basically like, if you're less than that, you're fucked. Like, nothing's going to be able to, like, you're not going to be able to do anything because you can't even afford food. And that makes sense generally. I think you would agree that makes sense. Hey, like, if you can't afford food, everything's else out the window. That's also why it's all based around the social safety nets we have here in the United States. If you make 100% poverty, you're going to qualify for all the other, all the help programs that you can get here, because you can't even afford food. So we'll help you out with everything else. SNAP, like I said, healthcare, SNAP, childcare, all these things. So 3 times the food, but in 1963, adjusted for inflation. We've talked a lot about it on this channel. I personally believe, I don't know what you believe, let me know in the comments one way or the other, the inflation metrics are shit. They're always under what they actually are. Real inflation versus the CPI and things like that are not equivalent in my mind. I don't think it pans out anywhere that CPI is actually a good reflection of the economy in general and how inflation has impacted people. And this author, Mike, makes this argument in his article as well. So, like I said, go check it out if you want. And the crux of his argument is basically, hey, that's all great, good, fine and dandy, 3x food adjusted for inflation over the last 60 years or whatever. The problem is, food has been one of the only items that kind of has gotten, I guess, however you want to argue it, through technological advance, through the fact that not most maybe, but a lot of the farm work is all tech-based. Like, we can produce a lot more food from genetically modified things, farm equipment, whatever you want to say. We produce a lot more food for how much labor goes into it nowadays than we did in 1963. So food has stayed relatively stable price-wise. I know in the last couple of years, everybody complains about their grocery bill because it's went crazy. But as a percentage of your budget, it's not that big of a piece of your budget anymore. Now people are really concerned about housing. Childcare is huge. Health insurance, things like that. Those eat up more of your budget than your food almost at this point. If they don't surpass it, they're at least equivalent. And those things were not major concerns back when the poverty line was established. And I tend to agree. I think I'll talk about it here in a minute when we get into it a little bit more, but there's definitely some holes I think I could pick in his argument, or at least be like, hey, this maybe needs tweaked one way or the other, because I think it's pretty easy to not debunk it, but be like, hey, you don't need these things to survive. So I don't know if you can say 140K is the true poverty line, but you get what he's saying, I think. Everything's based around averages. If we all know averages can be skewed one way or the other too. But he basically recalculated average expenses for a 2-earner, 2-kid household. So mom and dad, 2 kids. in the United States, average, like I said, if you live in a similar situation to I do, rural, in the middle of nowhere, Midwest state, obviously your expenses should be probably lower than somebody who lives in urbanized, big city United States. So everything's averages, but take it with a grain of salt. The poverty line in the United States, roughly, when I just Googled it to kind of fact check this guy, because I was just curious, is that actually what it was? It's around 31 grand. If you make less than 31 grand, I think we can all agree, anybody watching this, if you're making 30 grand, you're kind of screwed. I know myself growing up, I remember filling out my FAFSA paperwork and shit for college for financial aid. There'd be another one, financial aid from the government as well. My mom's, I think, reported income was around $11,000. And that doesn't take into account child support and things like that. But we're definitely under that 30K mark. So we got all those benefits. You get the health care, I always forget which one's which. I need to figure that out. Medicare, Medicaid, whichever one's just basically, if you're under an income threshold, you get free health insurance, SNAP, all these things. We got all that because basically, like I said, you will not make it without it. There's no getting around that. And the real problem is nowadays, like I said, housing has went up, food's roughly the same, labor, transportation, obviously we talked about cars on this channel quite a bit, car prices through the roof, childcare, healthcare, and basically had an other category for about 20 grand, which is a lot for other, but we'll get there. And the expenses come out to $120,000 net, which means you got to make about 140 gross before taxes to get to your 120 net. And a huge chunk of this article is about this trap between your poverty level, 100% poverty, around 31,000 to 140,000. And like I said, depending on where you live, I think it's gonna impact you more heavily one way or the other. But for me, I'd say you'd probably adjust this all to like 90K. You're probably getting to the equivalent of the 140K, depending on where you're at. And the thing is, he's explaining through the article, if you've ever had to deal with any of these benefits or looked into any of it, all of it's tiered off your poverty rate. Like I said, if you're at 1x, 2x, 3x poverty, so you start losing benefits as you make more money, which makes perfect sense. It's like, we're not going to just keep giving you benefits as you make more and more money. We're just going to start taking them away because you can pay for it now, which makes sense on face. But at the same time, if the benefits immediately just get wiped out by a new expense that you were getting for free at taxpayer expense before, you're just at the same level you were before, except you have no safety net underneath you, especially with medical bills and things like that, because it's an unforeseen expense, and if you get hit with it, your private insurance most likely isn't as good as the government funded one. It seems like it's, at least as far as what you pay out of pocket, and then it can just bankrupt you. So he's explaining, as you leave your $30,000 income and you make up into $60,000, $70,000, you're going to lose SNAP benefits for the most part. You're going to lose health insurance, at least going to move into a different bracket most likely, and you're definitely going to lose at least part of the child care, if not all of it, as soon as you go into that next income bracket. And the expenses for child care, on average, his number was $32,000 a year. If you live in a big city, I can see this pretty easily. Around me, for the 2 kids, like his calculation was going, we're about to have our second kid. If we pay for everything out of pocket, lump sum, which is the cheapest way, so you got to save up all the money and just drop $21,000 at the beginning each year. And that means you'd have to, like, you can't pay monthly, obviously. If you pay monthly, the price goes up a little bit. So you save a little money if you can come off at lump sum. Like I said, 21 grand. I know people in my life personally, the one guy I know for a fact, he's paying about, 600 and some bucks a week, which I calculate is like $33,000 a year in childcare expenses, but he has 3 kids, so a whole nother kid is obviously going to cost more. So that range seems reasonable to me. We're in the middle of nowhere, Ohio. If you even just went down to Columbus or something like that, your childcare expenses could easily be 30 grand. I don't see that as refutable really in much case. And a whole part of this argument as well that he's making is that back in the day when this was all calculated, the poverty line was calculated originally, it was single income households, so childcare isn't really an expense that was a thing. So it went from zero to $30,000 for childcare expenses over the last 60 years, because he's given all the examples of what it did cost back then, what it costs now. Housing, through the roof. College, his example was something about being able to afford your college degree with a summer job, which back in the day you honestly could. Obviously now you're taking in huge sums of debt, hundreds of thousands of dollars. All of the staple costs that we have basically ballooned, except food. The one thing that locks in the poverty line, which locks in government benefits, and we've talked about it too. I mean, all these government benefits are basically bankrupt. Social Security, all these things that are taxpayer-funded programs are either insolvent or barely cutting it, in the sense of we just go into more and more debt each year to pay for all the expenditures through the safety net programs. And the thing is, the American dream, in the sense that you're going to work harder and benefit from hard work, like more effort equals a better life, which I think is a good way to summarize the American dream, if you want to call it that, isn't necessarily true in this gap between the poverty line of 30K and $100 and some $1,000 income for the average American. Because, like I said, as you leave, the expense, the new expense you incur that you were being taxpayer funded for, just takes away your increase in income immediately. I mean, that childcare one is going to be horrible. Like, yeah, you make 80 grand. Even if you bring home 80 grand after tax and you make 100,000 gross, and somebody goes, even 20 grand, you want to say it's only 20,000, not 30 for 2 kids. They just take a fourth of your income to childcare immediately, and say your wife works for half. You guys each make 50 grand, and by the time taxes are over, she makes what, 40, I guess. Half her income just goes to childcare, bare minimum. So for her to work, you got to pay for childcare, but she has to work. It's like an infinite loop of, we just take a big chunk of your money so you want to participate in the economy to make more money. As soon as you do that, we just take half your income from one of the people that are working. So it's like, there's a crossover point where this doesn't make any sense anymore. I'm actually discussing this with my wife now. It's like, I mean, after baby 2, do you want to even go back to work? Because we're netting like 10 grand over an entire year for somebody else to watch our kids all day. And would you rather just, we'll tighten the budget up and we'll do what we need to do? I would rather have my wife raise my kids. I mean, I like the people at the child care center and things like that. It's a weird situation where my wife works at the same one that our daughter goes to. But where's the net benefit? I mean, if she was making 100 grand and the child care was 30, hey, we're making 50 on top. That makes perfect sense. The math works out. But on average, the math isn't mathing. The benefit isn't there. And I think an interesting part of this whole article is a lot to do with this, where the argument of increased luxury out of the things we have nowadays compared to back then, and what you get for what the money you spend. And I think this argument makes a lot of sense. There's that pretty inflation chart that shows how college and healthcare all have exploded, and like TVs have lagged behind inflation or whatever. And it's like, great, you can get a TV for fucking cheaper than you could back in the day, and now your college is 8x what it used to be back in the day. I mean, stuff like that. The interesting argument is, like, he's talking about cars, how much cars cost, and this was what I was going to say. I was going to pick apart his argument over a little bit, where he's talking about transportation expenses around 30 grand. It's like, I mean, yeah, but like, hey, if you can't afford it, you can't afford it. So buy a fucking $10,000 car and keep your expenses, your yearly transportation expenses around 10 grand for interest, payments, and gas and insurance. You got to keep it lower than 30K. 30K is too much. Even if you're making 140K, 30K on cars for a year for 2 cars, you and your wife, and insurance and everything, is just too much. You're gonna have to cut it back. I've talked about that a lot on this channel. It's like, I mean, average is average, but average doesn't necessarily mean it's good, I guess, if you want to say it that way. Just because everybody else is doing it doesn't mean you can actually afford it. And reality doesn't really give a fuck what everybody else is doing. And if you can't afford it, you just got to cut back, or you go into debt and you live in debt forever. You can make that decision if you want. I refuse to do that. It's a different argument entirely, but to get off the tangent, is basically he's talking about cars and how it's like, oh, but they have all these fancy airbags and all this new tech and all this sensors and all this stuff, and it's like, yeah, agreed, but you can't buy a new car that doesn't have any of that shit. So you don't buy a new car. That's the solution. But the argument, I think, is stronger with, he's talking about phones, and he's like, well, people say, just fucking, you don't need this fancy phone. Look at all this stuff. It's a supercomputer. It does all these fancy things. You want the brand new phone, this and that. And hey, you don't have to have the brand new phone, but there is definitely a fact that you definitely have to have a phone in today's society. And I agree with him. He makes the point of like, you're not going to be able to have a job if you don't have a cell phone for the most part. It's not going to work. People text, people call, they want access to you almost all the time if you have a normal job. All your online services, banking, you're not going to be able to access anything. All the accounts that have dual factor this and that, which is becoming commonplace among everything, you will be removed from the modern economy if you don't have a cell phone in a general sense. I think that's fair. You let me know if you don't think so. But the luxuries, same with homes, where people are like, well, homes are way bigger now. All the houses cost so much money because the houses are huge. Nobody's building small homes because there's no profit in it. And if you want to argue that's government regulation or this or that, whatever, that's immaterial to what's the reality, that nobody's building 1,200 square foot homes, really. That's just not a thing that happens. So yeah, you want a starter home? Too fucking bad. They don't build them. They're not gonna build them. So go buy a $400,000 house and go into a bunch of debt that you can't really afford, and figure it out from there. I guess that's your only real option. And he closes the article on the thing I wanted to talk about the most, and I talk a lot of politics on this channel just because I find it interesting, but the main reason is because the finance and the politics, I think, are so interconnected, it's impossible to ignore it. And that's the part I find interesting. And we've talked a lot about here, especially with the SNAP benefit stuff, there's an animosity between middle class, which, if you agree with this article, which I do, that if you're making less than 140K, you're not. Middle class is like, oh yeah, sure. People might think you're upper class. You're in some cases, you're lower middle class to basically working poor, just because all your expenses just eat your income. So you have no extra money. You have no additional to do anything with as it is. And there's definitely an animosity there. And he has a nice analogy about two people treading water, and you see the lifeguard throw the vest to the person who's not treading water as hard as you. People who work hard for what they have, and see somebody who's working less hard, however you want to define it, but who makes less money, being thrown the life vest that is the government safety net while they drown. And there's something to be said about that. Like I said, if you're making 60, 70 grand and you barely outpace the threshold for all the government benefits, there's a good chance, and you got to be really smart with your money, which is a huge part of financial literacy and all these things that have become more popular, because you have to. There is no option not to. The option not to is go into debt, and eventually something will happen where you falter, somebody gets hurt, somebody gets sick, your house, something breaks in your home, and something will blow up in your face. That's what's going to happen. And you'll crumble underneath of it because there is no extra money. There is no emergency fund. And I mean, we can talk about in separate videos whether it's your fault one way or the other, I guess. There's things that are uncontrollables. You can try your best to avoid them. Hey, that's life. Bad things happen all the time. But that animosity between middle class to lower middle class, working poor, and poverty level is real. And it will manifest itself politically. I mean, it already has in the last couple elections and things like that. Populism on the rise, things. There's definitely a strong link between the two. And I don't think you can really argue it. And I want to know what you guys think about that. Like, what, if anything, what would you say is more crucial to the body politic than the classism and the pitting of the economic classes against each other as a means to an ends politically? I'd like to hear what you guys think. If you got something out of the video, leave a like on it. I appreciate it. If you didn't, dislike it, and I'll catch you guys tomorrow.